On another episode of the Soothing Semantics podcast. I am your host, Rafi Pinsky. Make sure to subscribe, like, share, leave your comments, and make sure for all of your real estate needs in South Florida to follow me on Instagram at Rafi underscore the realtor underscore in order to stay up to date on everything real estate. Go to the link in my bio, check out my weekly newsletter, and I look forward to helping you with all of your real estate needs. Without further ado, today we have Samuel. Do you go by Sam or Samuel? What do you prefer?
Samuel's all good. Sam's fine. It's not a problem for me either way.
Okay, awesome. So Sam Hyde, Samuel Joshua Hyde on Instagram. Sam Hyde is a writer, political researcher based in Tel Aviv, who has worked on various think tanks in Israel and the US. He's currently a fellow at the Jewish People Policy Institute, the editor of Dr. Einat Wolf's latest book titled We Should All Be Zionists, and a published writer with bylines in Newsweek, Haaretz, Jerusalem Post, The Sun, and a variety of political journals. So I came across Sam on a few different posts. You are extremely well spoken. I've seen some of your interviews on I-24. You just have a very intelligent, pragmatic take on things. And it didn't seem like you were in either direction, more liberal, more right wing. It was kind of hard for me to tell kind of where you stood. You just seemed to make sense. And you didn't have a big following on Instagram. So I looked and I said, okay, well, he doesn't seem like he's famous per se, but he has a very smart view of how the politics in Israel are. And then you had an article, and we discussed before the podcast that we weren't going to get into Rudy Rochman or Rochman for any kind of personal attacks. Neither of us have any interest in doing that because I and I believe you as well. We like him; he's a good dude. But we just wanted to kind of go into his line of thinking. So before we go into any of that, thank you, Sam, for coming. Pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having me. Thanks for those kind words. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. My pleasure. So give us a little bit of an idea of where you are. South Africa?
I'm from South Africa, but I live in Tel Aviv as it
Right.
stands. Yeah.
Right, but originally. Okay. So give us a little bit of a background on you, how you got to where you are now. That's a great place to start.
Okay, fantastic. Well, look, basically, I grew up obviously Jewish in South Africa. Today it stands as about 50,000 in the community. I went to a Jewish school, and my first interactions with de facto, because of that, my first interactions with anti-Semitism or anti-Zionism were essentially in my first year at university campus, which was a decade ago now. So many of the experiences that people are having in America, let's say right now, I was experiencing during the 2014 conflict, for example. South Africa, I always say, is a decade ahead of Europe and America. So the people that were running the chapters, the BDS chapters in South Africa, are now in parliament. And in fact, one of the main drivers of the ICJ case was the head of the BDS chapter at the university that I studied at. But gradually, that kind of forced me into position to looking deeper into things. And I started out my career actually at the Holocaust Center in the Contemporary Anti-Semitism department. And from that, I gradually got more and more invested in Israel and de facto by that, the conflict and Jewish issues. Until eventually, excuse me, I made Aliyah, and I found myself working in various different think tanks throughout. One was based on researching Middle East education, which is very interesting because I always say education, what is in someone's textbooks, is very much the window into the soul or the soul and the psyche of a society. People never educate their children, or at least not without any resistance against the core beliefs of their society. So when you look at the textbooks and the way in which people are bringing up their children, you can tell a lot about the political landscape and the psyche of any given society. And from there, I moved on to an institute called the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. And now I'm currently, as you said, at the Jewish People Policy Institute, where we deal with Jewish issues and Israel and the conflict and internal affairs related basically to everything Jewish, religion and state, various different things pertaining to Israel and the Jewish world.
Wow. Okay, that's a lot. How old are you, man?
I'm 31.
30. Wow, you're a year older than I am.
Yeah.
Dude, you're an intelligent young man. That's a lot.
Thank
So
you.
the way you write, your grammar, your vocabulary, you're an incredible writer. There, I'd like to think I have a good vocabulary and I write well, but you use words that I go, I need to I need to learn what that means.
Yeah,
You know?
I love writing. I really love it. It's something that I get a lot of pleasure and enjoyment out of, especially if it's something that I'm passionate about writing about. Then it makes it a lot easier and sometimes a lot more complex. There's no one size fits all when it comes to writing.
It's good. I just came up with a new term, a new term to coin. It's your verbal Viagra. It's good.
It's my verbal Viagra.
Yeah, well, if you ever need to use that again, I don't need credit for it. I think it's solid.
I will definitely credit you. Don't you worry.
I appreciate that, dude. So, okay, so that's a lot. That's very impressive. Now, from all the studies you've from all of the studies you've experienced, the writing, the journalism, going into the current conflict, or rather the current war and the overall 75-year conflict, and in reality it's been longer than that. Let's say we're talking about the establishment of the state. You mentioned prior to the episode that you would say you're a left-leaning Zionist.
Hmm.
How do you define that? And I mean, there's so much to unpack. We have quite a lot to talk about. We can either do it all in one episode or we can do a 2.0. How do you define yourself as a more of a left-leaning Zionist?
Okay, so I think that what I'm going to say will relate to something you said when you introduced me about you weren't quite sure where I fitted on the spectrum. Firstly,
Sure.
that's partly because I'm a researcher and I've really committed myself to what I find in the research is what I will express, and that might sound more left-wing or more right-wing to someone, depending on which side of the aisle they're from. I'm accused by hard leftists of being right-wing and the far right by being a radical leftist. So I don't know what that serves to mean. But I self-identify as a left-wing Zionist, that being that defined in Israel, my policies when it comes to religion and state and social issues are left-wing. And I inherently believe in the Zionist project, and I believe that represents very specific principles which align probably with secular Zionism the most. But on the other side, I suppose I'm very pragmatic when it comes to the issue with the Palestinians, which you mentioned, and the larger Arab world, and I try root my opinion in what I find, rather than stick narrowly to a specific category to which I believe I belong.
Interesting. Okay, I like to believe I'm the same way. I definitely consider myself a right-wing Zionist. Okay, so what you're saying is instead of thinking the way, say, maybe your family would have raised you to think, or from the biases that you may have grown up with, you believe very strongly that you do your best to think pragmatically, look at the facts, look at what you feel is reality, and then make a deductive decision, or think critically on what you think makes the most sense.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think what a researcher technically is in the word. It's to search for, and it's in its essence, is the pursuit of truth to some degree. A lot of researchers today, a problem I have is there's almost been a reverse of that. They arrive at what they assume to be the truth, and then they search for the evidence to back up the truth in which they've predetermined. I believe in searching for that truth, and once you have found some element of that, or you keep pursuing it, I don't believe you really ever arrive at it. But as you're going along in this process of searching, you start to create ideas around that that are based on reality. So I believe that a lot of people create political ideas that are unpragmatic based on the fact that they have the political idea, and then they try impose their idea onto a reality, where I try look at a reality and then develop the ideas from that. And maybe that's where the pragmatism comes along.
Okay, so what's an example? Give us an example of either Palestinians or Israelis that you feel, it doesn't have to be a specific individual, but it could be, if that makes the point easier, who instead of using facts and reality, try to surround their reality, or use their reality to change the facts, if I'm understanding that correctly.
Mm.
And how do you feel that you're combating that? Say, whether it be Rudy or what's his name, Mahmoud Abbas or Mordechai Kedar. It could be Yair Lapid, whoever it is on either side, on any Jew, Muslim, Christian. Give me an example, maybe of either a thought or an individual with a thought that you feel, your idea combats or.
Okay, so I'll tell you two things. I'll tell you there's two camps. Let me call them camps in Israel.
Okay.
There's two camps, and then I'll get to the Palestinians after that. On the one hand, you can look at leaders like Ben Gvir and Smotrich, who represent the settlement movement in the West Bank, or Judea and Samaria, however one chooses to identify with it. They have premised their beliefs at their core off Rav Kookian ideology, which believes in a biblical commandment that if you settle a specific part of the territory, it will lead to the redemption and the coming of the Messiah. I do not believe in determining the fate of the Jews, and the Jewish people and a state politically, of some idea that a savior figure is going to come by de facto of settling on some part of the land. Equally, on the other hand, I call these the two groups, the two messiahs. On the one hand, you've got the hilltop messiahs who believe that settling the land will bring on some great Jewish redemption. And on the other hand, you have the so-called peace camp messiahs who inherently would like to lie to themselves about what rests at the core of this conflict, in order for them to continue essentially to pursue a program in which has failed multiple times. So I believe that what I offer comes from a perspective in which I acknowledge maybe what has been acknowledged by the Israeli right, because it was in their interest to acknowledge it, and that would be Palestinian rejectionism, so that they could pursue their political program. But I believe that the Israeli left, and I'm speaking about the pragmatic left, the Zionist left, reached the correct conclusion in the sense of that the two-state solution, whether realistic in our current reality or not, and I say it's unrealistic, is at the end of the day in the best long-term interests of the state of Israel itself and the Zionist project in the 21st century. The problem and why we cannot get to that point is firstly because what rests at the heart of the conflict, and now this plays into the idea with the Palestinians, is actually something very simple, and the Palestinians are remarkably honest about it. But their honesty about what rests at the heart of the conflict, and because the conflict in and of itself at its core is actually so simple and can be summarized in one sentence, that's precisely what makes it so difficult to solve, because it's not solely over territory, but more of an idea. And that idea at its core is essentially the century-long idea that the Jews want to have a state and that the Palestinians want the Jews to not have that state. That really rests at the core issue. And everything else, okay, I will quote my friend Einat Wolf. She says, and everything else are just details. Now, those details are problems and they're symptoms, but they are, at the end of the day, the result of that idea. People very rarely fight over territory or food or to satisfy their egoistic needs. They fight far more based on ideas, and that can be found in the myth or the national story. It could be found in tradition, perhaps in religion. That's really where conflict stems from. And I think that on the one hand, the left wants to negate that core issue because it makes it so much more difficult to solve. I think that there's elements of the right who acknowledge that core issue, but they acknowledge it for the self-interest of their own political program, so that they do not have to solve it and can advance certain political games. which resulted essentially in that idea of managing the conflict, which was detrimental in all aspects, and we've seen how that's kind of turned out.
This is so I agree with this completely. Let me add. I agree with this completely. Here's my thing, right? I'm a more traditional Jew. I am very much a skeptic with anything, right? When I was younger, I grew up religious, grew up modern Orthodox, believed in all of it, didn't know, didn't doubt it. I mean, I had my questions. I question things.
Sure.
But now, as an older person, do I know Messiah will come? I don't know that for shit. Do I
Yeah.
doubt it will ever come? Absolutely. I have my doubts. I look at it and I see Muslims believe this, that, and the third. They believe that the flying horse, and we believe in the splitting of the sea and the burning bush. And the Christians have forget about the Christians; they have 30 million different beliefs. And so all of our crazy, war apes all have our different feelings of who the Messiah will be, how he'll come, what Messiah will look like, and we're all killing each other and fighting over land and ideas of who the Messiah, which is just so counterintuitive because the Messiah is supposed to be this perfect notion of peace, tranquility, utopia. And in the meantime, we're doing everything we can to fight each other and disagree with each other in order to get there.
Yeah.
So I don't agree with the notion that if we settle all of the land, Messiah will come, because who the hell knows? And neither does anyone. Anyone who claims to know for a certainty, quite frankly, is an idiot, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah.
I do happen to support Jews in the West Bank. I don't believe that it's disputed territory, occupied territory, because I believe at the end of the day that Palestinians, for the most part, are highly religious and highly ideological. It's not like they're all a bunch of secular people. So they believe that that land is theirs due to Islamic conquest. So if using that same logic, then it's ours now because of Jewish conquest. And quite frankly, if we're talking from a religious point of view, from a religious discussion or religious argument, the Jews, in my opinion, have a lot more validity to that land. If we're talking about, deserving that land from a religious or ideological perspective, I think the Jews have a much stronger claim. That's my feeling. And I think all. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, look, it comes
That also
fundamentally.
wasn't my point. Go ahead, and that also wasn't the crux of my point, but yeah, go ahead.
No, I understand. Look, it fundamentally comes down to two things for me. When we speak about religion, I always want to bring it back to what is the current global reality in which we live. And the global reality, we basically start the 20th century with colonial empires, and we end the 20th century with the birth of nation states. And some 100 new countries are born based on this principle of self-determination and sovereignty and independence. That right is essentially enshrined for every single people's. The thing that makes the Palestinian predicament unique is that among those 100 new countries that were born, and that's South America, that's in Africa, that's in other parts of the Middle East, it's even in parts of Europe, the Palestinians essentially were the only people to predicate their future off the rejection of the independence of another, to the point where they said no and have continued to say no. But I do not de facto think that means that based on that, we should operate our entire political life and way of thought based on that. Because I think that has proven to be self-destructive for the Jews themselves and for the state of Israel. I call it essentially the politics of resentment. We have very, very legitimate reasons to be resentful towards the Arab world and towards the Palestinians, as well as towards the global community's double standards and reactions towards the state of Israel and anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism as it goes around the world. There's very, very legitimate reasons, but resentment as a political force has been so destructive. It's actually never been adequately admired for the destructive nature that resentment carries when politics is operated off resentment. So we have to be always asking ourselves, not a question of religion or secularity or any of these things, what is in the best interest of the Jews in the 21st century? That needs to be the primary driver as we get stuck essentially in a conflict that seems totally unsolvable. And that's where the position that I try come at from every decision and every opinion that I try analyze. what is in the best interest of the state of Israel given the current circumstances. And I believe, on your point about, the Messiah and settling and bringing this, and it's this central core argument throughout religion and throughout a lot of ideology. Marxism, in a way, has a very kind of messianic quality to it, right? And Marxism claims to be totally secular identity and reject religion, although I would say it's kind of just a secularized operation of the ancient church. It's very dogmatic, but nonetheless, the point that I was really actually trying to get at is that when you look at what was successful about Zionism, is that when the Jews are driven out of this land by the Romans in the exile, there's a few movements that are developed in that aftermath that seek to physically return the Jews. And they all fail. But through that failure and through the distance in time, the idea of return becomes one that is essentially passive in many ways. It becomes through the rabbinical perspective, no longer through a peoplehood perspective of actual liberation and return, but through a rabbinical perspective of, if we perform the 613 mitzvot for the Torah, and we do a whole bunch of series of things according to the rabbinical worldview, the Messiah will come, and upon the coming of the Messiah, we will get to return and be independent in our homeland, in the land of the Jews once again.
Mm.
Zionism kind of comes at a time and it shatters that entire worldview, which is why there was so much religious opposition to it in the beginning. Now, it shatters that precisely because it is at its very core, beyond everything, born out of the period of the Enlightenment, which is rooted in the ideas of human action, that we are responsible for our future. We are in control of our destiny. And that's inherently why I believe it is the Zionist way today, despite Palestinian rejectionism, despite enemies throughout the Middle East, despite any circumstance we find ourselves in, to pursue the responsibility of human action. I say Zionism cursed the Jews with responsibility and blessed the Jews with responsibility. It finally gave the Jews a platform to be the best of themselves, the worst of themselves, and the most mediocre of themselves. So it's in our fate now to determine what we do going forward, and it cannot always be based on the rejectionism of another population. We have to be able to hold these two things and say, because that rejectionism exists, and we're not in a perfect reality from it, what do we do about it that is in our best interest? And doing so, you have to take into account many things, global realities. You have to take into account that we live in an international system. You have to take into account the regional dynamics that are going on, the regional dynamics for the positives, Saudi, the regional dynamics for the negatives, Iran. You have to take all of these things into account when we ask ourselves that question.
Right. So I hear your points, and they make a lot of sense. My question to you is then, my follow-up question to you is, I don't believe in a two-state solution from alone in and of itself, due to the fact that we won militarily over and over again against several countries that had a goal of eliminating us. So that in and of itself kind of makes me say, fuck you, with all due, not fuck you, to them, makes me kind of say, well, if you wanted to come for us and eradicate us, and you failed on multiple occasions, sorry, pal. That's already one thought process I have. Now you're complaining that it's not fair. We should have more land. You took it, this, that, and the third. Well, maybe you should have shared it. Maybe you should have shared it to begin with when you didn't have a state back then, and quite frankly, never had one. Maybe you should have accepted it then. But I understand why you didn't. You figured, these Jews, they have no chance. All of our Arab armies are going to come together. Well, they'll have no problem defeating them. It'll be a piece of cake. I get it. I might have thought the same thing if I were in their shoes. But you lost again and again and again and again. At what point are you going to keep trying to kick us out of the land, or at the very least take it over, and then maybe you'll let us live there? So that's my issue. My issue with that is you fucked up multiple times, and now you still want us to give you land. And when we've given you land, we've given you Gaza, we've given you these things. not only did you not appreciate it, you kept asking for more. You kept attacking us. My challenge, and I'm going to ask you a question shortly, but my challenge with the two-state solution is not only do I not believe that I don't want it to happen, quite frankly, but if I knew theoretically there could be peace, I have a hard time believing that the vast majority of them would simply be happy with that circumstance. I think it would cause less security. We'd have less land to secure our borders, and they would continue to fight us just as they are and continue to get more land because many of them believe religiously, ideologically, Islamically, the entire thing is theirs and they will stop at nothing until it happens. That's my belief. So how do you feel about that? And why do you think a two-state solution is actually a doable and correct way?
Yeah, well, because at its core, I don't believe that the solution was ever the problem. As I said, the core idea here is that the Jews want a state and the Palestinians don't want the Jews to have that state. So once that idea changes, then I believe the two-state solution is in our best interest. And I'm going to tell you why, because I'll do so by addressing a few things you said. I inherently believe that Israel should be a Jewish state, which means a Jewish majority, and that it should be a democracy. So that basically constitutes certain borderlines for us, because there are 5.5 million Palestinians on the other end of in the territories in the West Bank and Shtachim. And currently you're sitting at about a 50-50 split between Jews and Arabs between the river to the sea. And the Palestinians have a higher birth rate and a much larger population size than the Haredim, who have the highest birth rate themselves in Israel. So you're not looking at a 50-50 for much longer. But you're stuck in a situation in which at that point you're giving up one of three things. You're giving up the Jewishness of the state, in the sense that it's a Jewish majority state and will operate according to how it already does, or you're giving up democracy by needing to essentially not grant civic and national rights to a specific population within that borders, which is essentially an apartheid system. Okay, so basically just end off. The security argument about the settlements in the West Bank doesn't really hold up to much weight, and I'll tell you why. Two reasons. Firstly, we all acknowledge that this war started and continues to be, as we speak right now, region. Okay? Let's say, worst case scenario, Israel decides it's going to create its border with Jordan, it's going to annex the West Bank, and de facto, lots of Palestinians leave. Perhaps in the worst case scenario, lots of Palestinians actually get forcibly expelled. Does anyone in their right mind think that that stops the war? No, it just moves the war from one border to another. Now, let me tell you why the border that we have right now is not actually working in the way in which we think it is, okay? So the idea is that, according to the Alon plan, you build settlements in certain areas, especially on the high ground, okay, in the West Bank, in order for the Palestinians or Arab armies not to basically use that as a launching pad into the state of Israel. Now, fundamentally, I actually agree with that principle, and I think that there are certain settlements, especially the ones that were developed at that time, that have fundamental strategic security responsibility. Okay. However, the settlement movement through religious dogma, okay, has expanded because the Alon plan didn't take into account that there was this Rav Kookian ideology, has expanded to points where it is absolutely a hindrance to our to the interests of our security and our borders, and I'll tell you why. Pre-October 7th, you had 75% of our active military stationed in the West Bank. 80% of that 75% are standing guarding settlements and traveling with families there to schools and to grocery shops and all of that kind of stuff, leaving only 20% in the West Bank of that 75% available to go and foil terrorism. But if you take that 75% that are there in the West Bank, it means you've got 25% only left to be spread across two border fronts with Gaza, with Hamas, an Islamic jihadist terrorist group on the other side. Another border front with Hezbollah, okay, who are even more powerful with the same ideology, okay? The Golan with Syrian militias on the other side, the Arava Strip with Jordan, and the Sinai border with Egypt, in which there has traditionally been ISIS activity, not so much anymore, but there traditionally was ISIS activity going on in the Sinai. So you got 75% because of the way in which the settlement project has developed, not according to the Alon plan, but a whole bunch of outposts and whatever just scattered throughout the region. Okay, 75% are there, leaving 25%. There's a reason why. Okay, essentially, let me just caveat this. Hamas was planning this attack for years. Okay, and there's many technical and security and political factors that allowed for that to happen. Okay, but the one thing that we shouldn't ignore and we shouldn't do is we always look at the symptoms of problems and never at the entire paradigm and the way of thinking. And this plays into it. There's usually 27 battalions stationed on those two border fronts with Gaza. On the morning of October 7th, there was only 5. 22 had been moved to the West Bank because a group of Jewish extremists and Palestinian extremists had got into a massive riot because they're living on top of each other and both want to kill each other. So 20 battalions are sent, leaving the border totally susceptible. Now, I'm not saying that that is what results in October 7th. Of course not. There's a decade's worth of policies and false perceptions that you could essentially, subdue a jihadist organization through.
Why would you need 20 battalions? Why would you need 20 battalions? How big are these riots?
Well, these are not. Well, I'm not exactly sure, but that was the statistic that was released by the Shin Bet. So nonetheless, this was a big thing. This was actually a very big thing. There was a 2,000. Basically, what the story goes like this: there's a group of Jews who are part of the Hilltop Youth, which is a very radical movement.
I know about this.
And set up a sukkah, okay, in Huwara, which, let's remember, a few months before they had burnt down.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And the whole town started rioting. You had about 2,000 people rioting, and the army would rush there. Now, I'm not saying that that's how Hamas were able to infiltrate our borders. I'm saying that in a pre-October 7th reality, it was clearly unsustainable to have 75% of our military in one place because of the way in which the territory has been developed with the settlements, leaving only 25% to be spread across. Fundamentally, our entire security paradigm, not just whether we're using camera systems and radar systems and all this stuff, it's more of our entire perception, and that includes Netanyahu thinking for a decade that he could subdue what Hamas was through material means and increasing work permits. All of these were flawed and failed concepts from the get-go. And essentially, that's what I think is the collective consciousness undertaking us as Israelis need to make, not just dealing with the symptom and saying, oh, we need more cameras and more radar systems and more this. No. It's not going to work. We have to rethink the entire way in which we view our security apparatus, and that has been hindered in some capacity by the political decisions that we've made.
Interesting. I also fundamentally believe that the Muslims, the Palestinians, and many of the Muslims in the Islamic world, they also need to accept that Israel's not going anywhere.
Oh, 100%.
Here's my thing.
There is no peace until that actually happens. There is no peace. But in the meantime, we sitting and waiting and managing the conflict is what we did leading up to October 7th. That failed. Right. Two-state solution doesn't seem realistic. One-state solution, self-destructive. So we have to come up with something.
Well, right? I'm going to give you the raw reality, brother. Because like I said in the DMs, I would love to be able to live side by side with them. Okay, and to me, Palestinians are just a group of different Muslims like Israelis are. You have Afro-Palestinians, you have blonde, blue-eyed, pale Palestinians. Because remember, I was in the army. I was in the West Bank. That's where I was. I used to see very brown ones. I used to see Palestinians that are whiter than you and I, pale as anything. Probably from Syria and Lebanon originally. Plenty of them. I saw redheaded Palestinians. I saw black. I actually didn't really see black Palestinians, really. Maybe one or two. But to me, they're a group of Arabs mixed in with some Europeans, some Africans, some Jordanians, Egyptians, Lebanese. I don't have to tell you this, you already know this.
Mhm.
And it's the same with the Jews in Israel. So it's a Muslim group of people and a Jewish group of people, and we're all fighting over this piece of land. And in the Muslim world, as well as the Palestinians, need to come to reality, whether they like it or not, that the Jews aren't going anywhere. And the sooner they accept that, the sooner they're going to live peaceful lives. We're not going anywhere. We have nowhere else to go. We're going to fight until the end. And if they want to keep trying to fight us, they're going to keep getting their asses kicked. Because as far as we have it now, America is supporting us. Now it's challenging. We have our challenges with them. We've lost some support in the international community. It's a hard. We're damned if we do and we're damned if we don't. We're Jews. This is what it is. We can't please everybody. We've tried throughout history. It's never worked out. We have to do what we have to do. It sucks. It is what it is. We try to appease people, they hate us. We don't try to appease people, they hate us. It is what
Yeah.
it is. Not to say we shouldn't try to do the right thing, but we're fucked either way.
Well, that always comes down to what's in our best interest. And usually that has to take into account moral and ethical, that always has to take into account moral and ethical judgments as well.
Well, of course, I'm not saying we should do whatever we damn well please.
No, I don't that you are,
No,
but I fundamentally agree with what you're saying. At the end of the day, look, you can see the difference. Okay, anti-Zionism is a very destructive idea, just as anti-Semitism has. I view the two as inherently linked. Okay,
sure.
like they are inherently linked. Anti-Zionism is the postmodern iteration of anti-Semitism, but anti-Zionism and how it operates once it institutes itself, essentially, it becomes state-sanctioned or whatever, is really got very little to do with the Jews themselves, and actually is total a nice early warning sign of a society in the midst of a mass crisis, really. And that's been true for anti-Semitism as well. But if you look at the Arab states today who have come to the table and who have made peace, or who are considering making peace, isn't it interesting that these all happen to be states who have isolated religious fundamentalism to large degrees into what it looked like before from public life, who no longer align themselves with those kind of theories, and in their own way, in their own right, are seeking some level of a path to progress in which not making peace with Israel is technically impossible to their vision. It's not about us, it's about them. It's a change within the Arab world. That's what the Abraham Accords was. It's not about us. It's not that all of a sudden people woke up and were like, you know what, the Jews, they're not that bad. No, it was an internal process that was going on in the Arab world, split not by Sunni and Shia, but essentially led by the Gulf, countries who are seeking a new path towards progress versus countries who continue to exist in kind of this dogmatic, fundamentalist way of life. And you can clearly see the split in which every single one of the countries who live by that are failed states, and every single one of the countries who don't live by that are not failed states. So I think that
so true. I say this, by the way, I say this a lot on my podcast. Very true.
Yeah, and it plays into what you said about essentially the continued lack of self-reflection among the Palestinian population, to initiate aggression, to celebrate triumphantly as if they've already won the war, just as the war is starting, as we saw on October 7th. And then when there's a military defeat, all the things that determined the conflict and determined the war simply disappear. There's like an element.
They take no time to reflect. Well, you made your bed, now you got to sleep in it. It's like you celebrated October 7th. You were so excited when they were getting dragged on motorcycles, women were raped, kidnapped, and people were slaughtered, babies, all these horrible atrocities. You were in heaven when it happened. And now you get fucked up. No, let's call a spade, right? Yeah. Israel comes in, guns blazing. People are pissed off. The Israelis are mad, right? We're talking 18, 19, 20-year-old soldiers. Well, you expect them to be these 50-year-old distinguished British gentlemen with they're pissed. Their kids, their families were kids. They're Jews. They're Jewish family. Their Jewish brothers and sisters were just battered and killed, right? They have weapons. They're young. They're hormonal. They're angry. They're energetic. They're coming in to kill. Let's be realistic about this for a second. Your enemy just celebrated your family, not immediate family, but your Jewish family's killing and murder.
In some cases, your immediate family. That's what's tragic about it.
You're coming in and you're here to bring hell, right? And you do it, right? The government, the army has the capability to do serious damage, which it has. And now the Palestinians, the Gazans, are crying for a ceasefire. They're crying that they're hungry. I feel bad. I see Eye on Palestine on Instagram. I see these babies that are skinny, they're starving. I see it's horrible. It sucks. I'm not happy about it.
Mm.
But when you on one hand celebrate what Hamas did, and you expect Israel not to do something, you expect them not to retaliate. What do you think they're going to do? What would other countries do? What did America do after 9/11 when Palestinians celebrated 9/11, by the way?
Mhm.
So it's not that I don't have empathy. It's not that I don't have a heart and feel bad for them. But when you're so excited for my people to die and you expect us not to retaliate aggressively, that's delusional.
Mhm.
And by the way, if Hamas was and one more, if Hamas was successful in a crazy world, if Hamas actually succeeded in taking over the entire country, they would be stoked. You think they would say, "Oh, Hamas, it was a little excessive. You shouldn't have taken over the whole land. Maybe you should have
Should have
killed 10."
stopped just before Tel Aviv. Yeah.
Come on,
Yeah.
guys. Like, you didn't have to cut. They would have been like, let's go. Take the whole thing back. Kill whoever you gotta kill. Babies, women, dogs, donkeys, children. Take it. They would have been stoked for it.
Well,
They
you saw
failed.
that in polling. The polling was done by the PCPR, who is done by a researcher and a pollster, Dr. Khalil Shikaki. He's a Ramallah-based, and he's also a Harvard scholar.
Great, great last
I,
name. I like that.
yeah, I have immense respect for him. I think he's very reliable on the polls he does. There's this willingness to say, oh, well, it can't be relied upon because, it's all controlled by dictators and whatever.
Mhm.
That's not my experience with his work. It's an independent research facility, and I actually like to give the Palestinians credit where credit is due. They're
Mhm.
very honest about their goals and their aims and their intentions and their desires and what they
That's
want.
that's true,
Um,
by the way. That's true.
yeah,
They, unlike us, they actually just say what they, and we don't believe them. That's another thing. We're like, nah, you guys don't want to do that. Come on.
yeah, yeah,
You
yeah,
guys don't really want to kill all of us.
yeah.
Let's chill. They're like, no, we actually really just want you guys to get the fuck out of here. They're like, no, Palestinians, let's work it out, And they're like, no, we really don't want to work it out.
Yeah,
Not
yeah,
all of
yeah.
them.
Well, look, I mean, there's that. But what I do want to say, because I want to draw something through everything that we're saying, and I want to say that it's not that it's impossible for the Palestinians to undergo that period of self-reflection. There's not something inherently pathological in them forever and for eternity.
I agree with you. I agree with you.
We have seen this happen time and time again, even throughout the last century, with Japan, with Serbia, with Rwanda, with Argentina after the Falklands War. All of these states initiated active aggression. All of them celebrated triumphantly as if they had done, something. As if, I always say it was as if the only way you can describe it essentially is the way the people celebrated the Allied victory in New York. Everyone was kissing everyone in the streets of New York after the Allies defeated Nazi Germany in World War II. But essentially, these countries underwent a process of self-reflection, right? And that's going to be key. That's going to be key. That is the key. When there is a period of self-reflection that underpins Palestinian society about asking itself what is in its own best interest, because for 75 years, this has not worked out at all. So once that kind of consciousness shift changes, that's why I still believe that the two-state solution is both possible and in our best interest, because I don't believe it's in our best interest to be a minority in our own state. Okay.
Um,
And I also believe that it is possible for the Palestinians to do that. I'm not saying that they will. I'm saying it's possible because we've seen it be done by many, many countries around the world in the last 150 years. The thing that doesn't aid that process is the international community. Essentially, if you look at the Palestinians, prior to October 7th, they have received 4 times the amount of funding, inflation accounted for, than the whole of Europe under the Marshall Plan for post-World War II development. there's no conditions put on anything. There's no conditions about what needs to be accepted, what needs to be changed, whether it's the education system, whether it's leadership, whether it's reforms. There's no conditions. There has to be conditions. You have an education system that teaches children about jihad and martyrdom, and that living a life, dying for the cause is better than a life lived well. Essentially, what you want to do at that point is you want to say, right, your education system only exists because we fund you, which is true. This is Europe and America. If you do not remove every one of these examples and replace it with tolerance and peace, at which every 3 months a representative from our division will come and investigate that this is being upheld as well in the classrooms, you don't get any funding. And that's what it needs to be. And that's the problem. People say, well, then, but what about if the children then don't get educated? And I'm like, well, right now the children are being educated to think that it's glorious to commit jihad through martyrdom.
Right.
And also, what makes you think that finally conditioning something, seeming it's never actually been done, will not produce the results that we actually need, which is to undergo that collective consciousness shift among the Palestinian population. You know, it's almost inherently, it's by definition is insane to keep thinking you can wield the same results from the same thing. If you're not going to condition funding based on certain things, you're going to get no different results. I'll quote my colleague who says that the Palestinians are not a people who lack abilities or capabilities or resources or desires or objectives. There are people with messed up priorities, right? Mm-hmm. Because all the money that went into Gaza, which could have gone into development, went into building a large underground terror tunnel, okay? That's bigger than the tube station in London. Now imagine if that was actually a train station or if that was used to be built above the ground. So that is all a result, not solely of some sort of unique predicament to the Palestinians. What's unique is that they refuse, despite military defeat, to undergo collective consciousness changes. So we have to see where we go, but things have to be conditioned.
Because it's like a public, it's a collective denial of self-reflection. And it's much easier to blame the Jews instead of coming together and saying, you know what, our predicament is not what we ideally wanted, even though before 1948, the country was never on the map as some phenomenal country. It was just I wouldn't say it was barren like people like to believe. It was probably mostly barren. You know, it had houses, it had communities, it was a piece of land where people lived and did whatever they did. It was no means what Israel is, not even close. But that's okay. That's not what they wanted. They weren't exactly, you know, tech developers and whatnot. They didn't have that technology anyway. But okay, say la vie. So you didn't want the Jews there. Too fucking bad. We're here now. Deal with it. It is what it is. You're going to eventually have to give up that reality. So just real quick, and you're going to have to look in the mirror eventually and say, well, you have Gaza. Let's start with that. Develop it, build it. We gave it to you. We're letting you have it because, quite frankly, we could take it from you if we wanted to. So we're letting you have it. Do something with it. Come to the conclusion at some point, hopefully, that you should be happy with what you have. I'm just, again, I know this doesn't sound good. I know that any Muslim or any anti-Israeli that listens to this will be like, be happy with it. You took it from us. It's like, sorry, pal.
Yeah, it's just not part of the global reality. As I said, there's 100 countries born at around the period of Israel and what could have been Palestine in the West Bank and Gaza. It's literally exactly what you said is very important, because it plays totally into what I am speaking about with the self-reflection and the collective consciousness, where you're speaking about the Palestinians needing to actually just undergo this process and say, all right, cool, we've lost and we need to move on. But that does link as well. We must be careful that us here in Israel don't fall into a kind of collective psyche trap that they've fallen into when it comes to the perspective, and that goes into the politics of resentment. They have based their entire worldview, their entire political structure, or their goals, everything on essentially the destruction of a Jewish state in any borders. Okay. Despite their rejectionism and the consequences that we carry, we cannot make all our political decisions for our future, okay, on their self-destructiveness. We have to make decisions that take into account that and that deal with that effectively. Of course. In fact, we can't ignore that. But what I'm saying is it depends on what are you doing? Are you saying, oh, well, you don't want this, so because you don't want that, we're now going to do this? And I don't think that has wielded very good success for Israel. If you look at our history. So before doing anything, we need to ask ourselves, wait, are we doing this because it's in our best interest, or are we doing this to stick it to another population? And sticking it to another population is that politics of resentment that I spoke about. It's very easy to fall into because the resentment is understandable. I mean, the resentment even traces back to the fact that we're Jews and the country was developed post the Holocaust, and now everyone thinks it deserves to be wiped off the map, and all these kind of, ridiculous ideas that are never going to happen. But that's very important. It's very important that we don't fall into the same collective shift of basing every single decision and every single thing we do off another population without taking into account whether that decision is in our best interest.
Very valid. Okay, no, that's a very, very valid point. So what I'm thinking is this. First off, I forgot to mention, I didn't forget to mention, I wanted to throw this in. This whole concept of mujahideen, being a shaheed, martyrdom. If parents are so happy for their children to die for the cause, quote unquote, whoever's listening and not watching, I'm putting my quotation fingers up. If you're so happy about your children dying in the name of Allah, in the name of Islam and all that to kill the Zionists, and then they accomplish that goal, and now you're crying and you're blaming Israel when that's what your kid wanted to do. That's what you were proud of your child doing. It sounds like you're manifesting these issues. So I think that's a good start would be not to glorify this as much as you do, not to glorify it at all, rather. But I find that very ironic. And I understand being sad that your kid died, but then maybe you shouldn't be so proud of the idea of him going out of his house with a gun. Secondly, I believe that a one state nor a two state will work, because I believe that with a one state, the Arab population will outgrow us and will no longer have a Jewish majority. With a two-state solution, they're going to continue to fight us, and the Jews will continue to fight them too, I imagine. But more so, the Palestinian population, there'll be too large of a percentage of them, even if it's 10% of them, that will continue to aggressively fight us. That's my feeling. I want to believe otherwise, but that's my feeling. What I believe, there are only three options, and two of them are very horrible options. Nonetheless, they're not options that I want. They're options that I think are really, I can't see any others. One option is that one side mostly is killed. And again, I want to reiterate, this is not what I want to happen. Second option is that one of the sides is primarily kicked out and sent elsewhere. And the third option is that a Palestinian state is created in Gaza, where they accept that as their state. And Egypt would allow them to have part of the Sinai and to grow Gaza, to allow Gaza to be larger. It wouldn't have to be the whole Sinai, but maybe a third of the Sinai, maybe 30%, 20% of Gaza, 25%, whatever it would be. This way they would have a sizable piece of land. They would have coastline. They would have some valuable real estate. They would be given aid either from Israel, from America. I don't think Israel should give them aid, but if they do, out of a sign of peace, we'll give you X amount of money. Countries come together, give them money. We say, no more Hamas, no more of this extremist nonsense. This is your state. If you guys behave, if there's no more terrorism for X amount of time, you can come and work. You can visit Al-Aqsa. You can visit Jerusalem. You can do business with us. This is your state. No more fighting no more of this notion of the whole thing is ours, river to the sea. This is what you have. The other challenge would be the West Bank. That would be another challenge. I wouldn't maybe I don't know if I don't think the West Bank Arabs, the West Bank Palestinians would just agree to all go to Gaza. It sounds perfect. And this sounds like a very utopian idea. Well, not utopian for them, but
Look,
that's what
I think every solution
yeah,
seems totally unrealistic and unsustainable.
yeah.
Okay. And that is because we are firstly in the middle of the war still, because I say the middle because we still don't know really what could happen up north. My feeling is that somehow there'll be something diplomatic about that will end up coming through, and it won't actually expand in the way people think. That's just a feeling. I'm not saying that's going to happen. It's a feeling I have.
Really 50-50 with that. I'm really
Yeah,
50-50.
yeah. I gravitate between different
It
thoughts.
depends on the day, right? You get the
It
100
depends.
rockets
Yeah,
coming in,
the
you're like,
day where 100 rockets come in, I'm like, oh, okay, here we go.
save it,
Uh,
save it.
and then the next day, I'm like, okay, so it didn't happen. And I think we're going to go the diplomatic route, if that's even possible. Well, anyway, like I don't want to get distracted with that, but basically what I'm saying is that we have to ask ourselves what is realistic, right? In the sense of if every solution is currently unrealistic, what is realistic as a solution? Okay, what is realistic in a perfect world? Okay, in a perfect world.
I need allergy medication. That's what's realistic for me. I'm done. I don't. I've been on mute, but dude, I've been. Oh my god. Ooh, okay. Go on.
Look, what I'm saying is you're not going to get 4 billion people to leave their homes, to leave. Put it this way. Here's what we need to ask ourselves. People who support Jewish settlement in the West Bank, there's about 440,000 Jews, would say, I will never, ever, ever move one of those 440,000 people out of their home for a peace deal. You now can't expect 4 million, 100 times that amount to move to do the same thing. So you've got that, but probably let's even say that America agrees to it, which will never happen. But let's say America does. We will be sanctioned to such a degree. Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2014 sent Russia's economy from that of a global superpower to smaller than the state of California. Now, I'm aware California's got quite a strong economy, but let's be honest, we're talking about a large-scale superpower with
Holy shit! I didn't know that.
and that is as a result of international sanctioning. And let's be honest, if people think that we won't get sanctioned, there are many countries begging for us to do something like that so they can sanction us. So again, it goes back to that question, is it in our best interest? Because I don't want to live in a state that economy is totally collapsed. I come from a country like that. I come from South Africa, which the economy is totally collapsed. It
Couldn't
can
they
barely keep.
technically sanction us anyway right now?
Oh, yeah, but South Africa is an irrelevant play.
No,
It's irrelevant.
I don't mean South Africa sanctioning us. Couldn't any of these countries do that already? Why do they need to wait
Oh,
technically?
100% they could, but it's not in international interest. Let me put it this way. You will have people in populations who would want that and who will advocate for that. And some of them might even be otherwise reasonable people who just have misread the conflict or misunderstand it, but otherwise they're quite reasonable because if you believe that Israel is this inherently evil state seeking to do X, Y, and Z, well, then sanctions is actually quite a moderate way to go about it, right? So there's that element to it. But Europe and America and Great Britain are not, and the UK are essentially not sanctioning us because they don't have a reason to. But I can tell you that a red line would be essentially displacing 4 million people from a territory to which they call their home. And the sanctions that would come down on the state of Israel might, just because of general animosity, might make the sanctions that came down on Russia look like child's play. So the question really becomes in that whether we like it or not, we are very reliant here on America in the Security Council with the UN, and as well on the relationship we have, which is aid, which is not really aid. It's kind of everything that we get, we have to reinvest in the American military structure. But nonetheless, that's a very vital partnership. So that's why I said earlier about the international community, that because we live in an international system, we live in a global reality. We cannot like that we live in a global reality. It's okay to not like it. We can wish that it wasn't that way, but it is that way. And that has to be taken into account. And I also don't think by any means that doing that will stop the war. In fact, I think it would, if the war was, let's say, going to end in 30 years, I think that would tack another 70 onto it. So basically what I'm saying is no solution is actually implementable to the point where there is no war until the Palestinians, until that idea of no Jewish state in any borders essentially is not the top priority of the cause. Once that changes, the solution is implemented. The solution is implemented. All the framework, all the groundwork is all there. People have been drawing up the exact plans and the exact details for decades.
Well, how much do we give? You think we should give them more? I mean, the West Bank, the Jews are not going to leave the West Bank, nor do I want them to. There's no way you're getting 400,000 people out.
No, but that's because at the end of the day, the peace deals always took that into account. So there was land exchanges, right? With not removals. At the end of the day, the main blocks of the settlements exist in 4% of the West Bank. Right. And that's where about 85% of the 440,000 live. But beyond that, let me put it this way. And I believe this to be inherently true, not only according to polling, but also according to sentiment in Israel. Israelis are tired of living in war. They are exhausted. Everyone is done. And this is a conflict of exhaustion between two national movements, a conflict of exhaustion. The Jews want a state. Is it worth it? And the Arabs want the Jews to not have a state. When do they give up on that? Okay. But
I gotta give it to the Jews are so tired. I gotta give it to the Palestinians though, because they just
100%. That's why I said I give the Palestinians the respect where they deserve, and that includes that they're very honest about what they mean.
Oh, that's for sure. But these people are just quit, man. Like I think that neither do the Jews, but it's like when you it's like they've been just continuously getting their asses handed to them, and they're just like, oh, we'll just keep doing it forever. But that's also religious. I don't think without their religious ideology behind it, it would be a lot harder for them to keep that fight going because they're so religiously fundamentally behind what they believe. They have to. It's God is commanding them to. So it's not. I don't think from their own desire they would probably want to do it as much. If they were secular, they'd be like, you know what, fuck it. But if they believe that we have a commandment to do it, we must, because if we die, we're going to heaven anyway. So what difference does it make? You know what I'm saying?
That's often a misread of Palestinian society, and it's a big critique that I have of my fellow Israeli leftists, is that we're mainly secular and liberals, and we see things through that lens. So we try and understand.
I have with people who try to argue with me. There's a big issue I have with people who try to argue with me on it. It's they look at Palestinians from this liberal, very open-minded lens. And it's like, but that's not how they see it. If they saw it the way you saw it, not you, but if they saw it the way your typical liberal-minded person saw it, we probably wouldn't be in this situation.
I know the conflict would be solved a very long time ago.
Because most Israelis see it that way. The vast majority of Israelis have that very secular. They just see it as we're Jews, no matter whether we're atheist, religious, irreligious, or whatnot, whether we're black, orange, yellow, or green. We're Jews. We want a land. I don't care if you're gay, lesbian, straight, you identify as a frog. It doesn't matter what you think. We want self-determination. We're Jews. We can do and think the way we want. Fantastic. Most Palestinians, on the other hand, at least the ones with a voice, who make any sort of a difference in those territories, even if theoretically 50% of them were secular and say Ramallah, they don't have a say. So it doesn't matter whether they're secular or not, because they
Yeah.
don't control what happens. They don't control the trajectory of Palestinian action.
Yeah. Look, I've always said the conflict's multidimensional. It's not just national, it's not just territorial, it's not just religious, it's multidimensional. It's got all these elements to it, but it always comes down to that one core sentence that we started this with. But this is why I think that, the two-state solution was always the Zionist solution. It was never a Palestinian idea. Okay, it was always a Zionist idea because it created a reality in which the Jews could maintain a Jewish majority that was a democracy. And when you speak to Israelis, 100% a majority want the state to be Jewish, and 100% a majority want the state to be democratic. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Majority of Israelis want to live in a democracy. You're going to find some person who thinks that some sort of benevolent dictatorship or some sort of
somewhere in the West Bank, in Kartapuach, yeah.
You're going to find, but as you saw for 9 months leading up to October 7th, 150,000 Israelis on the streets every single week protesting what was perceived to be a threat to the foundational idea of the democratic fabric of the state. And you're not going to find many Israelis who are going to say, oh no, this definitely should not be a Jewish state. So those are fundamental principles. So to uphold that, there's certain realities in which we exist when it comes to drawing borders. But here's the thing that I think is often forgotten about. Israelis are very emotional, but very pragmatic. They're very pragmatic when it really just comes down to it, when it comes down to things. If the Palestinians, this is just feast your mind essentially on this. If the Palestinians very, very genuinely, let's say with the Arab world, and I mean this genuinely, I'm not going to say, oh yeah, but then they're going to use that to do that. I'm saying very genuinely, they're done. This war is over. We no longer seek any form, whether it's through diplomatic means, international forums, on a battlefield, or through terrorism. We no longer seek from the river to the sea. We just want our state to be independent. And the Saudis say, we back this and we back you and we will make peace with you. But guys, those settlements, it's a problem. We got two hostile populations still living on top of each other. It's a problem. I can tell you right now that a majority of Israelis will say, this is a genuine peace thing that's ending the war, including, by the way, some people who live in the settlements. And this is data that's actually been proven time and time again, that if it was sanctioned by the state, there are a large population within the settlements who would say, you know what? For this to be reality, sure, we'll move to a house 5 kilometers in, whatever. But I'm not advocating for Jews to be removed. I've actually wrote articles and drawn up plans about exactly how we could go about it and where lines could be drawn so that people are not getting removed from their homes. I don't desire anything like that, but I do think that if you had to give Israelis the choice, the bottom line choice, that it was very real, that it was actually happening, that the paper had been signed and it was done, and that it was going to be genuine and that it was going to be lasting, but that was something that needed to go, I think you would have a majority who would say, it's a sacrifice we're willing to take to stop living in this reality. I think there's even portions of the people who live in the settlements who would go along with that. And then there's a minority of 10% or 8% of the 440,000 who would resist. But, they also said they would resist from Yamit, from Gaza, from northern Samaria and whatever, and basically create a civil war. And none of that happened because I do fundamentally believe, despite my differences with many, many people in Israel on the opposite side of the political spectrum, I do fundamentally believe that everyone in some capacity does try operate from the perspective of what is in our best interest as a Jewish state. We just have very different ideas of what a Jewish state is. Okay, but I think that at the core, Israelis would desire peace. At the core.
I absolutely agree. They're tired of it. They want it to work out. It's just that there's a lack of trust. There's such a lack of trust.
There's no trust, and there being no trust is under.
Neither side believes the other. But I think that, and I say this very strongly, that I said this on the Harris Sultan video, and I stand by this. I will not. I refuse. I will not take this back. Jews in general, in comparison to much of the Arab world, aside from maybe the Gulf states, the Emirates, they are much more open-minded. They are more highly educated. They are more open to opposing thought, and thereby they are, quite frankly, as a whole, I believe, more intelligent. And it's not inherently more intelligent, maybe, but I don't think that that's maybe more of a supremacist view of things. I think that because we have haaretz and we have these, left, right, when we have all these opposing views as Jews in our own country and outside of our country, we are much more open to the idea of working out a peaceful resolution than much of the Muslim world. Because I even see all of these protests and these rallies, and I've watched countless debates, YouTube videos, because I want to understand the other side as much of it as as much as I possibly can, as much as humanly possible. And most of them don't know anything. They really don't understand the conflict at all. This whole white colonialist project, they think all Israelis are white from Brooklyn. I'm an Ashkenazi Jew from Brooklyn, but they think that all of the Jews there are just these white people. This is such a big part of it. And you have these groups, you have these journalists, like you have Vice News, CNN, Al Jazeera. What do they do when they go to Israel? They look for all of the Ashkenazi Jews and they interview them, right? They don't interview the Temanim, they don't interview the Mizrahim, they don't interview the Ethiopian Jews, they don't interview the the high percentage of dark-skinned Israelis that have never lived in Europe ever,
which is the majority of the population, 60%.
Right, and that have never been in Europe ever, and they are just as dark as the Palestinians. Many of them are darker because there's a lot of white-looking Palestinians. So that whole idea, so many pro-Palestinians just don't even know that. They're not aware of it. And that's such a large part of the...
Yeah, it's because their whole concept of the conflict is not the conflict, but it is the conflict is symbolic for them as a redeeming factor from which they can essentially redeem themselves from the guilt of their past. Correct. So that's why colonialism is the thing in England and racism is the thing in America. And apartheid is the thing in South Africa, and genocide is now coming out of Europe. And, this is all...
way to relieve guilt of their own ancestors of what they've done. So they now put it on the Jews, and now the Jews, they're the scapegoat, as they always have been.
Yeah, I've said, when people ask me, why would you say that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism? I always say, look, let me just draw you a 2,000-year thread between the things that are happening right now and things that happened 2,000 years ago. And it involves the pro-Palestinian progressive activism and the ancient church. I did a video on this recently I gave a talk at the Tel Aviv University at the Institute for Anti-Semitism. There's something inherently Christian, and I want to be blunt about this, but there's something inherently Christian, but Christian dogma from the older days, from the ancient church time in progressive politics today. Not just that it's dogmatic, not just that it has a very totalitarian element, or that it's got this universalist element, but conceptually, the difference between the Jews and the Christians all of old is that the Christians, it wasn't just the diversion of Jesus, but the Christians believe inherently in the original sin, that one by the fact of birth possesses this proclivity to sin, and therefore, therefore it is the job of oneself as an individual to essentially spread this universalist redemption so you can reach salvation. And there's a dogma and there's a scripture and everything that you follow in order to bring that salvation on. Now, if you look at the progressives, they believe that they are inherent sinners by the fact of birth, because they believe that they are born in 1995 in France, makes them part of the French colonial empire of old, and they have to be against colonialism because they are part of that sin, and therefore they have to redeem themselves. And there's an entire doctrine in which they have to acknowledge this and acknowledge that and fight against this. And the commonality with the Jew is that because the Jews did not believe in the original sin in the old days with Christianity, the Jews could not be seen as a people choosing wisely between good and evil. They became the symbol of the morally failed element of society, because if they didn't believe that they were inherently sinful, if they didn't believe they were inherent sinners and didn't commit to the path of redemption and universal and global justice, okay, through this essentially element of salvation, then they were preventing the salvation. Then they were the obstacle to that salvation. And now it so happens to, don't get me wrong, I've written essays and essays and essays criticizing the policies of thing, and particularly of this government, which deserve to be criticized rigidly and with, in my opinion, with force. But there is no ways that in reality Israel can be seen as some sort of the greatest obstacle to your global justice stroke. Okay. I just, firstly, I'm not going to make the argument and say, oh, look, you got Russia and Syria and whatever. No, I hold Israel to a higher standard than saying, look how bad these people are. We're not as bad as them. I hold us to a high standard. But really, these people inherently believe that Israel's guilty of the sin to which they are guilty of. And in order to reach redemption, they have to fight what for them is the moral failure. That's it. That's literally what happened 2,000 years ago and continued to happen. That's the through thread. That is really underpinning it. No one will tell you that because they don't know it, because it's so built into progressive politics for so long. Progressive politics is a modern secular incarnation of the Catholic Church of old. That's what it is, right? And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that. I'm not speaking against Christianity or progressive politics. You're more than welcome to do that. I'd just like you to not do it at the expense of your concept that the Jews happen to be an inherent moral failure.
Wow. Wow, dude.
That's where I think the underpinning is, but it's deep. I mean, the other underpinnings are more obvious.
I read this article that you and now you've gone really deep on it, and I think so. So here's my thought: as you were saying this, it made me think from a religious standpoint. I believe that Christianity, with all of its different forms of Christianity, and then you had Islam, they did not feel included in the supposed chosenness of the Jews. And let me hear me out here. This is my psychological thought, my deeply psychological thought. There's an inherent belief, the Christians deep down and the Muslims deep down have this fear that they were not included by God in this chosenness. So they created their prophets, essentially said, you know what, the Jews aren't really chosen anymore. They sinned. God isn't with them anymore. We're the new chosen ones. And now and this is this constant fight that we've had over time. We've been this small minority that the Christians and Muslims have been able to kick around and pass around for thousands of years. And quite frankly, it's been nice for them. We've come into their societies. We've become successful. The moment the country went to shit, they blamed us. They kicked us out. We went somewhere else. Time and time again, that was the story. There were times of peace. The Muslims had periods where they were peaceful with us, many instances where they weren't. But we weren't the ones that had military strength. And they were always able to overpower us, come after us, kick us out, take our money, take our belongings, and say, all right, you had your time, we're done with you now. And hold on, I had such a good pointer. Now, okay, so now with Israel, where the Jews came back and settled and created a state, and not only a state, but a very successful one at that, I think the Muslims and Christians, the ones who are highly religious, who believe in the concept of Messiah, I think deep down, more so the Muslims now, but deep down, are worried that maybe the Jewish prophecy may actually come to fruition, and they're scared that if they don't follow the guidelines of what they believe is supposed to happen, it may happen in our favor. And I've never heard this before, and it may be far-fetched. Maybe you think it's crazy, but I think that
I don't think,
Christians now,
yeah,
yeah,
carry on, sorry,
I
carry
think Christians now, even though they have their belief in how it'll turn out, us coming back to the land is how prophecy believes it should be. So they're in support of it so long as it ends up going according to their plan.
according to
Now,
the rapture. Yeah.
correct. Now so they're like, settle
I mean,
there.
but those would be the extreme evangelicals, of course, not I wouldn't necessarily say all of Christianity is kind of, I'd say it's all there, but I don't know. I've met a lot of Christians who don't know that when I say that to them.
Oh, well, I don't know. Listen, I don't know if
But yeah,
Christianity
but,
is a great.
but definitely among evangelicals, which is a large portion of Christianity, so for sure.
So I don't think they actually want us to have our version of the Messiah. They just want things to pan out the way it's supposed to in their version. And then the Muslims are like, no, no, no. The Garquad tree is going to protect you. The other stones and trees are going to call out to us with their
Yeah,
fucking ridiculous thing. And again, I don't just call their ideas ridiculous. I think we have ridiculous ideas too.
yeah,
I think Jews just have reformed, and I think many of us have realized that a lot of this may be ridiculous. And so we've said, you know what, maybe there's truth, but we're a bit skeptical. This stuff may seem, I think some of the Jews may have been on psychedelics when the burning bush happened, just a possible speculation. No
for sure,
disrespect.
for
Okay.
sure.
Just a possibility there, right? And I don't mean no disrespect, but the reality is I think this is a massive, if we peel back a lot of layers of this onion, I
Hmm.
think the fact that a large percentage of the Islamic world still believes that this land is Islamic, that is largely why we have this problem, because they think that the Jews having the state in the way that it is fundamentally goes against Islamic teaching and Muhammad's teaching, and therefore they have a religious requirement to fight us in taking it back and waving the Islamic banner. And that in and of itself, because you mentioned that if they change their beliefs fundamentally, yeah, sure, the Gulf states have reformed, certain Muslim countries have reformed, many Muslims may have reformed, but the overall Muslim population, which we're talking millions of them, still have that belief that the Jews must leave, or at the very least cannot have rulership over it, and it must become Muslim land. So I think that, and I say this to some degree in a spiritual sense. I'm not a very religious person, but I do believe in God, and I don't know what will be and what won't be. I do believe that in order for us to have Israel as a state, it's going to come at a cost. It's going to come. You take certain medications, they have side effects.
Hmm.
I think that as a Jew, we have to accept reality that we're probably going to be hated and hunted for eternity, man. It's a shitty thing to believe, but I just think that God has given us, and again, this goes a bit into religion, but this is what I can't help but think this way. We've been given lots of blessings. We've been given our success, our intellect, our financial success, our all of the things that we've had through millennia. I think the side effect of that is jealousy, is people misunderstanding us. And I don't say that our shit doesn't stink at all, but I think that we disproportionately are hated, uh, people want to remove us and kick us out and send us to different places. I think this is a reality we'll probably have to live for eternity. And again, it doesn't mean that we can't
Yeah.
hopefully resolve certain things with Palestinians, but uh, we've been disproportionately hated throughout history. I think to a degree this is probably going to be a problem we have, and until maybe it isn't. I don't know.
It's
Maybe I'm wrong.
it's interesting what you spoke about with Islam, because I've been doing a lot of thinking about it since October 7th. And I'll say two things on it, because the one will need clarity on why I say what I say. But essentially, as it stands right now in 2024, Islam represents the mother lode of bad ideas. Okay. But once upon a time in your country, Christians living in the southern part would leave church on a Sunday dressed in their Sunday best and go watch an innocent black person be hung from a
Oh
tree.
yes. Oh yes.
Okay. And there was something spiritual for them about that. We saw that a few weeks ago in the West Bank for two Palestinians who were accused of collaborating with Israel. So that's no longer going on in the South. Is in the South anymore. Sure, you got racism and you got all these things, but it's no longer going through that. And that was through that process of self-reflection. So I say to deny that that is an issue throughout the Islamic world now is to deny the very possibility of progress, right? So it extends beyond denying reality. It denies the very possibility of making progress. So that's what I'll say on the one hand, is that I don't think Islam is somehow uniquely, inherently evil like many people would
I don't
say.
either.
Yeah, I think that Islam is in a stage in which Christianity has been in before, in which even Judaism was at in a certain part.
Agreed.
Um, and it just hasn't progressed. Now, I think that that leaves you with two options. It leaves you with the options of recognizing parts of the Islamic world like the UAE and Saudi and building with them. Or it leaves you with fundamentally saying, you know, falling into this kind of trap of not seeing the possibility of that progress, right? I'm not even saying that that progress will happen. It's the same concept of what I'm saying with the Palestinians. It's actually the same concept of what I said about the possibility of. But I would never deny that possibility because I think that has greater consequences for the way in which we think. Because to deny, firstly, that that is an issue denies not only reality, not only is it immoral, not only does it allow for injustice to flourish, but it denies that possibility of what we saw. I mean, what I just mentioned as a description, correct me if I'm wrong, is not happening every Sunday at church service in America, after church service in America, right?
Mhm.
Now, sure, there's a lot of racist people around the world. There's no doubt about that. And that's a problem that needs to be dealt with and solved. But it's not exactly like, you know, in Florida, you're in the South. It's not exactly like on the outskirts of the city, people are hanging people from trees based on who they are.
Mhm.
So that progress is possible. It was a collective undertaking that the country went through. And it's happened in many, many countries, including the country I'm from.
Christianity was arguably worse. I mean, to Jews, Christians have killed more of us than Muslims by a mile,
Oh,
without a doubt.
that's why, you know, when the Western intellectuals go on about Islam and anti-Semitism, I'm like, my friend, they've got a long time to catch up to your civilization.
Oh yes. Oh yes.
Like,
Oh yeah.
I'm gonna say both of it's bad. I'd like to deal with none of it, but frankly, don't sit here and morally posture from about your Judeo-Christian values and your Western civilization about Islam and anti-Semitism. It's very deep in Islam, and it's very, very real and a very real problem. But if we're gonna start talking statistics and we're gonna start talking scale, they got a long way to go to catch up
Yeah.
to you. You
Yes.
know.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. That's,
I love listening to, you know, these kind of like public intellectuals from America or England or Canada. Uh, and
The Muslims are just terrible. And it's like,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Frederick. Well,
yeah.
let's get started
I'm
there.
like, you just hit those brakes for a moment before you finish that sentence because you're want to really consider because all the values that you're about to say all went up in chimney smoke through the towers of Auschwitz in the 1930s and 40s. So you did not practice what you preached when
Yeah.
it came to Jews. So yeah, anyway, one thing I will say about kind of the West though is, and I'll give the West credit for this, is that it is self-correcting. The Enlightenment period brought on this principles of individual and collective rights, and it has not always abided by it, but it is self-correcting in many ways. And the first time we've seen that self-correction really happen in the Arab and Muslim world has been the Saudi and the Gulf countries particularly the UAE, right? So I think
Mhm.
that's a positive sign. I don't think that firstly, I think that the conflict between Israel and Palestine can actually only be solved through the region. I think the only role the Americans will actually play will be facilitator. I don't think the Americans are going to solve the conflict in the way in which Clinton had an opportunity to do at Camp David when the Palestinians walked away from the peace deal. They'll be the facilitator. But the real mediators, maybe the Americans will be the ones standing there taking the photos. But the real mediators will be the Saudis, will be the UAE, between both peoples. It will be a regional multilateral dynamic because the problems are regional. The problems are not just between these two collectives. There are regional issues that require a regional dynamic, a multilateral engagement. So when people say to me, how do you get to the two-state solution? I say through the region. The problem with the thing that we did with the Abraham Accords was brilliant. The problem is that Israel misread the room. And let me say Netanyahu misread the room. Netanyahu saw the Abraham Accords as an opportunity to ignore the Palestinian issue. And the Israeli right has predominantly written that, look, the Muslims don't care about the Palestinians, the Palestinian issue. Palestinian cause was consecutively and for a very long time used as just something very useful for Islamic dictators. But it's not true that it's not cared about. What it is that these countries saw no benefit for themselves in continuing to engage in this rejectionist attitude with the state of Israel, the Jewish state, and they moved beyond that. But for them, very, very now, I know this, I've worked with some Emirati researchers and Saudi researchers. It is very, from their perspective, the Abraham Accords or any deal like that comes with the Palestinians. For Netanyahu, he was like, well, that's my way around the Palestinians. And that was his misreading of the situation. Okay. And I think we've now got to a point where I think a lot of us in Israel know that. I think some of us knew it before, but where the region plays the key role here. I'm very happy to see whether it's the Biden administration or whether it was the prior Trump administration really pushing that, really pushing the regional dynamic. I'm very happy about that because it began as a regional conflict and it's remained a regional conflict to many, many extents. Today, physically, it's regional. It's coming from different directions, even though it's not from necessarily all from state actors, but from terrorist entities. But nonetheless, it's regional. It's not just happening in the south of Israel, the north of Israel, and Gaza. It's happening. You got the Houthis in Yemen. You've got Syrian militias. You've got Hezbollah up north. It's regional. You've got Iran. Anyway, so the bottom line of what I'm saying is the way in which to implement, that's why I still think the two-state solution is the best solution, because it's the best for the Jews, for the Zionist project, from the perspective in which what I've said, it's pretty much the only thing the Arabs will accept. I mean, the Arabs that have made peace with us have signed on. They have officially recognized that the one state in the two states, the one state of this two-state plan is Jewish. Right? That's never been done by the Palestinians. People say, well, they recognized Israel's right to exist in the Oslo Accords. Technically not, because the Oslo Accords were an interim agreement to reach a final status agreement. And when it fundamentally came down to the final status agreements, they walked away from deals to birth independent Palestinian state, thereby ending the occupation, capital in East Jerusalem, no settlements or land equivalent exchanges, in favor of a full right of return into sovereign Israel, which turns the Jews into a minority in their own state. So basically, the two-state solution, according to the Palestinians, as it stands probably, is an Arab majority state in Gaza and the West Bank and an Arab majority state where Israel stands today. That's something that I think is important to remember. But when it comes to the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, even Saudi, when it comes to Egypt and Jordan, we can say everything we want about them and we can have all our issues with them. I call the peace deals we have with Egypt and Jordan non-aggression pacts, not really peace deals. We don't really have peace with them, but they're non-aggression pacts. And I don't require much more from the Palestinians other than that. I want a non-aggression pact. I don't need
Good point. That's so they made peace with us, Sam, because of our power. They made peace with us because they realized that the juice wasn't worth the squeeze. That's what
Oh,
I.
no, I 100%, 100%. I don't doubt that at all.
And that's fine
Um,
with me too. That's fine with me too. I don't need them to love us. I just need them to leave us the fuck alone.
yeah, and we actually have diplomatically at least fine relations with Jordan and Egypt. Fine, fine. Egypt is still on a social level actually one of the largest producers of anti-Semitic content, and yet we have peace with them, and that peace still has held for over 4 decades. Okay, so fundamentally, I don't require much more than that. I just want it to be over,
Right.
and I want to live in a Jewish majority democratic state according to the Zionist kind of project, in secure borders. And if a non-aggression pact or some sort of series of arrangements that looks like that is the way to go about it, and we're not going to be friends and whatever for a very long time, as they say in Israel, sababa. You know, I don't believe that a peace deal necessarily needs to be a John Lennon-esque outcome. It can just be that we both agree to no longer have a war, and that's fine. That's fine for me.
Yeah. No, I think that's I'm on the same boat. We I very much I'm on the same page with that. So I'm curious because part of my allergies
No, you're
when it came to when it came to the article you wrote on Rudy's thought process, give us a little bit if you don't mind. And just to reiterate, it's not the point is not to shame him, speak ill of him, but the premise of it where he's been doing the advocacy for so many years. What would give us a little bit, and I want to get into this too. I'm gonna share my thoughts too. Why do you think that there's such a problem with it where he's saying one thing, saying another thing, and everyone who say these college students that he meets with and people that are so supportive, they're not really listening to the underlying the underlying points. So go into this a little bit, and Rudy, if you're listening to this, I hope you are, because I just want to make sense of this. Because when he came on my podcast, he was saying that he believes in one state, and going into your article, it won't be a problem because we'll be able to bring all these other Jews in. I was talking to him and I said, listen, man, it sounds really nice. I just don't think it makes any sense in any objective reality.
Mhm.
So go into it if you don't mind,
Yeah,
because it's
look, I
just
mean, many things in the world have sounded nice. Communism sounded really nice at one point. So did the ideas that Stalin wanted to implement. But things are different in reality. I think people might have. I think a lot of people, again, this is about the ideas. I think a lot of people, um, in some part due to that article I wrote, kind of woke up to the ideas and started seeing things. So I think there are a lot of people, especially other, let's say, activists, who are aware of that now and who have spoken out about it. But fundamentally, Rudy's perspective is not. It's not rooted in anything that represents a specific portion of Israeli society. But so basically the ideas, it's like speaking to someone who's in like some like fringe group in America and thinking that you should take their ideas and change American democracy because there's 15 people somewhere and somehow they've uh, through social media have told you they represent all Americans or the collective idea of what the state should be. But his ideas are very, very religious, actually, in a sense, and not in the traditional way, but they're very much based in the kind of Cookian theory of, redemption, and there should be. I think I'll put it to you this way. It's been a long time since I wrote that essay. It's been a very long time. I don't know when I did it, maybe 2 years ago. And maybe it would be best if, we can get into it, but you can put the link in the bio because I really haven't thought about this essay for quite some time. But I'll put it to you this way. I struggle to take someone seriously who lives in a world that doesn't exist. What I mean by that is Rudy assumes that certain realities which cannot be escaped do not matter. So his answer to the Jews will be a minority in a one-state solution is, oh, we'll import all these Jews from Africa, most of whom are actually not Jews.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think they're Jews
Yeah.
either.
That's his idea. Well, there's no proof of it, so
It's pretty much whoever wants to be Jewish, we'll just let him be Jewish.
yeah, will be so that we can settle this land because it will supposedly bring Messiah. We're basically going to bastardize the religion. That's a huge problem to me. You're going to bastardize the custom. You're basically going to open up the religion to people who are saying they're Jewish. I mean, anyone could say they're Jewish then. At that point, then you've fundamentally gone through that a specific tribal custom within Judaism. Judaism is not a religion that seeks to expand its identity. That is Christian. That is Islam. Judaism is very collectivist, and it's important, and there's a reason for that. So going and gathering the exiles, I call this a Messiah complex, and I really think that that's what it is. I think it's developed
But
into a
even
Messiah.
more so than that, I don't think that would allow us to remain a majority.
No,
There's no.
no. But the thing is, what I'm saying is that there's no one state solution. Okay, but the Jews would be a minority in the one state solution. No, because we'll import apparently 12 million Jews from Africa. I come from Africa, and I come from the biggest Jewish population in the country, which is 53,000. Okay, so I don't know where he's coming up with 12 million. So I struggle to take people seriously when they're basing their arguments off things that are fundamentally not part of reality. That was my issue. But what Rudy is very good at doing is, because he seems to be quite a charming character, is he essentially presents his ideas in the linguistics, in the kind of language paradigm of a specific audience. So he presents these ideas, which some of them very much align with people like Ben Gvir and Smotrich, okay, but in a completely different way, okay? And by doing that, it's a form of dishonesty, in my opinion.
It's also kind of both. He kind of plays into both sides. It's like on one hand, he's very right wing, but then he's very liberal, but then he's very, very right wing, but then he's very liberal.
Well, he's actually fundamentally very, very right wing. He tries to speak like a leftist to sell his ideas.
Right.
Because he knows that on American college campuses, there's a certain linguistics paradigm. And if you can speak about that and you can sell these ideas like that,
but it also makes it more interesting because he just fought in Gaza, so he definitely garners support that way, which I respect him for. It's like you went and fought the war. I respect you for that, but that doesn't make your points any more valid.
Well, that's the thing. It's there's many people.
That's the other thing that annoys me, by the way, is, and I'm not gonna. The thing that annoys me about even bringing this up is that he has a much bigger following than you and I do, right? So automatically he might listen to this and say, "Oh, you're just trying to." I don't think he will. I give him enough credit to be intelligent enough not to do this. I'm not the kind of person to purposely try to argue someone that has a larger platform for me to get a larger. I'm a very outside the box thinker. So I want to make that clear that that's not my goal. I know that's not yours.
Definitely not my goal. I was accused of that though when I wrote the article.
I'm sure you were. I'm sure you were, because that's a defensive thing. Is like, oh, you're just trying to ride off my back. It's like, no, I genuinely don't understand how what you're saying makes any sense.
Yeah, I genuinely, as a fellow Israeli citizen, I genuinely disagree with you, and I think you're misrepresenting the state of Israel and the ideas and the society and what people want to otherwise, let me be frank about it, to otherwise both traumatized by their environment, but also not. A lot of people don't know. A lot of people don't know the different political factions in Israel, what parties believe in what parties push what policies. I'm not saying everyone, I'm saying there are a lot of 18, 19-year-old kids who don't know what the policies of
No,
shops are, of UTJ are, of religious Zionism, of Otzma Yehudit, of Yesh Atid. They don't know what the policies are. You don't live here. It's not part of that. That's fine. But you have to be aware ideologically of what you're choosing to believe in. I mean, it seemed like it was becoming a growing problem that required addressing. I was asked to write that article, by the way, and I've been asked to write it 3 times before, and I turned it down. I turned down writing it because I write analysis and I write about ideas. I don't write about people. But I think there was a video about something about I don't want to misquote it now, but it's in the article, the exact quote about the Jews and the gas chambers and the trains, and they went willingly and all this kind of stuff. And that was it for me. It was like, I was like, this is fundamentally an issue now that requires addressing. And yeah, you said to me, where do you think we had the conversation right in the beginning. I can't remember really where it came from, but I said there's people who create ideas based on what they find in their search, based on facts and reality. And then there's people who let their ideas inform their reality. And I think Rudy and his circle of people fall into the latter. Their ideas inform the reality in which they live, which is not actually attached to the reality, not in any sort of evidence-based way.
right. Yeah, I just, there's no way in which his idea makes any sense. And I would love for him, listen, it would be great if he was on the Zoom right now and he can give us his ideas. I'm very happy to discuss it. Because how in the world does that make any sense in any objective reality? We're gonna have one state, and then we're no longer the majority, and we expect to be able to have sovereignty and rule the land and continue to have it a Jewish democratic state. It's absolutely impossible.
I say it straight as someone who comes from South Africa and was a scholar of apartheid. In practice, that is apartheid. I have written many articles refuting the claim of apartheid against Israel and going into exactly why. But at that point, when you are a minority population issuing sovereign rule over a majority population, there's only one way to do that. Okay. Right. And that will be apartheid. And on the other side of that, I say, this goes beyond Rudy. This is the fatal flaw of the one-state solution. Okay. Ultimately, the Jews would be giving, in a one-state solution, a Jewish state from the river to the sea, the Jews are ultimately giving up their right to self-determination, to live in one state with the Arabs, Palestinians. Okay? In that case, the burden of proof falls on the Arabs. Are the Arab Palestinians can they, without a shadow of a doubt, guarantee that the Jews in this land will not be treated as dhimmis, that they will not use state institutions merely to kick the Jews out? We need that burden of proof without a shadow of a doubt. In the opposite, in which there is Jewish sovereign rule, can the Jews provide without a shadow of a doubt that they will not use the state institutions to strip the rights of the Arabs so that they can maintain Jewish sovereignty? I don't believe that either population, okay, I don't believe that anyone genuinely, like who's really being genuine and just removing what they believe about a one-state solution, can without a shadow of a doubt guarantee that future for both peoples. And there fundamentally becomes immediately a flaw, because if I'm not prepared to give up my right to self-determination, to live in one state with a people, that might strip my rights away. And I don't believe the Palestinians should, based on that principle, I don't think the Palestinians should fundamentally give up their rights, which they do actually as a people, whether people like to acknowledge it or not, they are collective today as a people. They recognize themselves as one unified people, have a right to self-determination. The burden of proof is on us. If they're going to give up on that principle to live in a state with us, and we strip them of their rights, well, that's no good future for anyone involved. So I always say the one-state solution simply, and in my opinion, in reality, would just change the name of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict to the Jewish-Arab Civil War. That's it. That's all it provides.
Yeah.
A change of name to the conflict. So
And
my
by the way,
issue.
it would work as long as they're a minority. Like, meaning if the West Bank had no Palestinians and Gaza had no Palestinians, and again, let me be very quick. Let me be very careful with this, right? Because I'm not insinuating that they should go anywhere. What I'm trying to say is, if they were never there in the first place, this is all theoretical. I'm not. It sounds very genocidal because people are going to read into this. Theoretically, if they were never there, and the Palestinians were only 20% of the population in this entire area, we wouldn't have an issue with the number of people. 20% is a pretty reasonable number that we can manage.
We have that inside right now.
Right. They have their rights. As long as they don't commit any attacks, they can vote. They can be in government. They can be judges. It's the classic example pro-Israelis love to use is the Ehud Olmert Supreme Court Arab judge. They use it all nonstop. They really need to get a new one.
The old Hasbara talking points.
Right. The classic ones, right? They have the same ones that keep reiterating. The biggest challenge is the numbers. That's what makes it so challenging. The amount of them and us. That's what makes this so complicated. If there was a very small number of them, and we know that we can remain a Jewish majority, I think a one state would be very viable, as it is with 20% of them, because there would be enough Haredim that are having enough children. There's a small enough number of them. It works fine, right? But being that there's so many of them, it creates a very difficult situation.
Well, yeah, I mean, on the other flip side of Rudy, you have people like Peter Beinart who believe basically the same thing, except they don't believe that Beinart doesn't believe. On the one hand, you've got people like Rudy and many other people like that in his circle who believe in one state from the river to the sea that is Jewish. Okay. On the other hand, you've got the Palestinians who believe in one state from the river to the sea that is Palestinian. And then flying around in the ethos of lunacy is people like Peter Beinart who believe one state from the river to the sea, that's a democracy, that's neither Jewish nor Palestinian, that has no ethnic national identity, because, Beinart lives in this tiny, tiny world, okay, in which nationality and ethnicity and all of that is just totally not important to people, because he lives in a tiny little part of the world in which they're universalists, and somehow the Jews are supposed to believe that a population with no history of democracy, who's certainly been totally wonderful to minorities within their own population as it stands, are going to be incredibly accepting of this Jewish minority who they've literally had a 75-year war with. You said to me, what are my fundamental problems? My fundamental problems are theories and ideas that really, I mean, my thing for the two-state solution is unrealistic now. It relies on things. It relies on Arab involvement. It's relying on things, right? But it's not detached from reality, because it's state policy, it's Arab state policy of parties involved, it's Western state policy, and it allows certain realities to maintain. I'm not saying that it's going to happen. I'm saying it isn't currently part of our reality, but it is attached to reality. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
These ideas about somehow it's going to be one state from the river to the sea that's beautifully democratic, like America, or I'd go even far. I think in Beinart's mind, it would look like Norway or Sweden, a beacon of social democracy. Just fundamentally proves that he doesn't understand anything about the conflict. And I will say the same thing when it comes to the other side. People on, Rudy and the people who believe that you can just somehow have a majority population who are just going to go, yeah, we're good with it. We're good with living below you in this one
France,
state. It's just, it's like these are fundamentally ideas that have no basis in a reality other than mass violence, far
yeah,
worse than what we're experiencing right now. So that's where my problem with that's where my frustration comes with them, with these ideas is that I'm like, your ideas are not informed by reality. Your reality is being based off your ideas.
right.
And that can be very dangerous when it comes to politics. It's not just an Israel-Palestine thing. It's a growing problem around the world.
Yeah, I think also if you take France as an example, these democratic countries that are very open to immigrants, people from all walks of life, take America, take France, other countries, when they become too open, too accepting, too free, you end up bringing in the kind of people that do not agree with that freedom. And over the course of time, they have a much higher birth rate and end up taking over. Poland is a country that realized that and refuses to allow it. And so they'll be okay. France is a country that is not willing to come to that reality, and they will eventually be taken over by the Muslims in that country. I firmly believe that. And if that's what they want, then that's what will happen, because that's eventually, in my opinion, what's going to happen. I'm not saying that every Muslim in France is a fanatic. I'm sure there are plenty of liberal, non-religious people who grew up Muslim. There are Arabs from Morocco, France, Algeria, wherever, that aren't, they may go to strip clubs, they party, they drink, they do their thing. They're French that happen to have, Muslim parents and whatnot. But you have a large percentage of them that are fundamentally Islamic and believe in those things and have a goal to take over France. And that probably will happen in the next 20 to 50 years. There'll probably be either an equal amount of them or a majority. And that France will change completely. And that will continue to happen in countries that don't. It's great to be democratic. It's great to be open and a melting pot and have this, idea of accepting everyone, and no matter where you're from, race, religion, creed, freedom of speech. It's a fantastic and very important way to uh, run a society or a country. But when you allow that to go too far, you end up with the opposite. So I think, and
Yeah.
Israel understands that. Israel, we sometimes don't realize that enough because we're so tired of fighting. But Israelis were not as naive as the Western world in many respects.
Oh, no, we don't have, yeah, we don't have that ability. We don't have that luxury.
Oh, we don't have that. Like, that's a great way to put
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, we
For
don't have that
example,
luxury.
we don't have that. I know how, I just hold the thought. Racial profiling, great example, right? In liberal states like New York, racial profiling, it's seen as this horrible thing. It works. Is it racist? Maybe to some degree, but
Mhm.
you're taking objective reality. You're looking at the facts. You're saying in El Al Airport, we need to look at people, look at their behavior, look at their dress, look at what they're saying, and ask them questions that will allow us to come to certain conclusions to protect the fucking airport. And
Mm.
if we do that, the likelihood of the airport not being bombed or a plane being hijacked, the protection goes up significantly. But if we're politically correct and we don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, so we don't do that, and we assume everyone's same, so we don't ask these questions, we risk terrible danger. So sorry to everyone listening to this that hates these concepts, but when you're worrying about the protection of a nation, protection of a people, especially when a particular country is not like America, where it isn't just everyone from yeah, you have Jews from all walks of life, but nonetheless, it's a Jewish state. You need to take certain things into account, whether you're going to offend the outside world or not, because those things work. And so
Mhm.
when it comes to this one state solution, it won't work.
Yeah. Look, I want to say something important on what you touched on there, because it really comes down to Karl Popper's paradox of intolerance, doesn't it? Popper is a philosopher from about the 50s, and he foresaw this becoming an issue for democracies in the West. And he basically said that at some point we'll face the paradox of tolerance. in which if you are tolerant of intolerance, you breed intolerance, and the otherwise intolerant people utilize your tolerance to create an intolerant society.
Yes, yes. Okay, so I didn't know this. This
Paradox.
is
It's called, Karl Popper, he was a philosopher. It's called the paradox of tolerance, the paradox of tolerance. And
it's really, yes,
and
this is exactly what I'm saying. Yep.
that's what's happening in Europe, right? Now,
It happens on an individual level. It happens on a national level. It happens on an individual level.
100%. Oh, 100%. And don't get me wrong, we have some for sure. I want to be think about this. You know, we have some extremists in our government, self-admittedly, self-described, politically, religiously, they are extremists. And we also faced a period here where we failed internally on the paradox of tolerance. Because let me tell you this. When Meir Kahane came to power in the Knesset and got one seat in the Knesset, he was eventually, for his behavior and the Kahane Kach party and the things they were involved in, he was expelled. He was expelled because he was engaging in what the Supreme Court and the State of Israel recognized as terror activity. Okay? We somehow got to a point, and I largely think it's due to that resentment factor in which I spoke about afterwards, in which we've allowed people who think Kahane is the greatest thing to ever happen into our government, running important positions of the country. Let's be honest here. You've got someone running the police who was banned from serving in the IDF. You've got people that are working in the finance ministry who, due to religious reasons, don't are representing parts of a community who refuse to work and contribute to the economic burden of the country. You have a government in which 2/3 of its cabinet ministers refuse to serve in the military. This is not a way in which you can sustain a country with what our circumstances are. So we failed, actually, on that very question in Israel. We have succeeded in it in many ways. When I said, I think I'll put it to you this way. As I said, I'm politically of the left. If you meet very few leftists who would have the conversation that we're having from France or America about Islam and certain things. The Israeli left fundamentally didn't have the luxury of becoming obsessed with moral posturing and moral theory. It had to deal with the reality that existed around it. That is the difference between the Zionist left and the left.
Right.
Is they had the luxury to live in a theoretical world of moral theory. Okay? And we don't have that here. So on the one hand, we succeeded in that. And on the other hand, we kind of slipped a little bit by. But I'm not necessarily sure that was the paradox of intolerance. I think we just, fundamentally, this country is based on specific principles. And I think that there's a level of nobility to the principles. We haven't always lived by them, but they exist for a reason. And I'm very skeptical about anyone who seeks to overturn those principles. So, that's not because I'm precious about those principles, but because I kind of believe that currently where we are right now in the world, they're the best we have. They're the best of the worst. And I think that the Declaration of Independence of Israel enshrines a lot of very good principles into what a country should live by. It's incomplete. It's incomplete. It needs a constitution, but fundamentally, the principles are there. I'm skeptical of anyone. I don't care if they're from the left or the right, far left or the hard right, because those are the only two people who would really try to fundamentally change the state institutions, the structures, and the principles of them. But I'm very skeptical of anyone willing to do that. That's just more of a personal thing.
Right. It's very tough. It's very tough. But the thing with Kahana, it's funny because when I was younger, I was a big fan of his. And when I heard his speeches, I definitely understand why people would call him an extremist. I think, though, in certain respects, he understood the Muslim way of thinking, the Islamic way of thinking. And I know you might vehemently disagree with this in terms of.
No, but because he thought like that himself, just in reverse. So that's why he
Yeah,
could understand.
yeah. That's what's so crazy, though, is like, as much as I don't support hard right or hard left in any religion in any country, I think that just as the liberals in Israel allow for the right to think, the right wing allow for the leftists to think. For example, if we only had one side, we'd be screwed. It's wild, but
Oh, no, completely. I agree with you.
take October 7th, right? All these people in Be'eri and Kfar Aza and all these peace lovers, which is nice in theory. It's good. I'm glad that they had good intentions. They wanted to make peace with the Palestinians. It's very nice. I like their heart is in the right place.
Oh, yeah, they're
But,
living in the reality, right? So they want to change it. They've
but
got to
look
live
what
with
happened.
consequences
Look
of conflict. Yeah.
But look what happens when the prime example used of that paradox, when they're trying so hard to do all these nice things for the Gazans for all these years. They gave them work. They tried so hard to show them the good side of Israelis. They were the first ones to get slaughtered. What did the right wing Israelis say? Well, what did you think was going to happen, idiots? That's what they said to them. They're like, well, obviously they felt terrible for them. They're like, it sucks that this happened, but they're like, we were trying to tell you this for all these years and you didn't listen, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then when right wingers and people like Smotrich or Ben Gvir, certain things happen, the left wingers are like, see, well, you shouldn't have done this and you shouldn't have done that. And I think with anything in life, there needs to be something in the middle. There needs to be a balance. And you only have that balance when there are those two heavily opposing sides. So, I agree with Kahana when I was younger because of the JDL, because of his anti-Semitism. Such a lover of Israel, such a lover of the Jewish people. He created an organization that protected Jews. I refuse to say that everything he did was bad. I can't stand behind that because I was a big JDL fan when I was younger.
You should,
Um,
I have quite a good relationship with Yossi Kleiner Levy, who I'm sure you're well aware of. Do you know Yossi Kleiner Levy?
no, it doesn't ring a bell.
Yossi Kleiner Levy is about in his late 60s now.
Okay.
Lives here he's in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
He's a beautiful thinker on Israel and the Jews. He works at a place called the Hartman Institute. He's written multiple books. And he was part of the JDL. And today he's like a very liberal religious Jew in the sense of like, he's like I don't know if you know the Hartman Institute, but they're like liberal kind of religious Zionists.
Okay.
And, a bit of a paradox in certain elements of it, but Yossi is amazing. Yossi is beautiful, the way in which he thinks and even the way in which he speaks about God, and I'm agnostic, but the way in which he speaks about God is really beautiful. I saw him speaking a few weeks ago about it. But anyway, the point in what I'm saying is that he's someone you should go read about. He's got multiple articles and a book on it, actually. And sometimes you can have I can't speak about the American predicament with the JDL and what was going on at the time and why it felt necessary to many people and why it felt empowering to many people. But that's what that was doesn't necessitate what was here.
Sure.
These are, two different countries. These are two different things. And yeah.
What were you about to say?
I was going to say that I would love to carry this on, but I actually have to. I actually have to go. Do you want to do a part two?
We can definitely do a part two. This was great. There's so much to discuss. It's been
Okay.
so awesome.
I'm
So
so I'm so sorry, but I didn't want to. I
I
wanted
listen,
to.
man. Yeah, no, it's been 3 hours, dude. We,
Yeah, yeah. Oh yeah.
you
There's
know,
plenty. There's plenty there.
yeah. Okay. Well, so let
Okay.
me quickly end this. Okay. Let me quickly do the outro, guys. Thank you so much. Hope you made it this far. This was another episode of Soothing Semantics. Like, subscribe, and share. Sam, thank you for taking so much time. I had an amazing discussion with you. I learned a lot, and I hope to do a part two with you soon. We'll organize it. So go do what you got to do, guys.
Fantastic.
Until next time.